Hey friends, here's a special exclusive episode from the Chia Logician side of the house that I think you'll enjoy. I wanted to be sure that you had something worth your listening time while I take a few weeks to rest and restore by stepping away from the digital world. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com. And where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
And now, please enjoy the special Chia Logician edition. Hey friends, we're back here at Qiological. I've got a part 2 for you today with our friend Sharon Weizenbaum. It's on classical medicine. Classical medicine. That is such a term fraught with so much meaning these days. I am looking forward to getting into this. Sharon, welcome back to Qiological.
Thank you, Michael. It's nice to be here.
So classic medicine. I mean, we hear this term bantied about so much these days, right? Because there's so many acupuncturists these days, and so often people brand themselves like this or brand themselves like that, and of course, we have this deep respect for the classics because that is a innate part of Chinese medicine that we want to go back and look at or try to understand something about what people that came before us were looking at. So, and especially these days, thanks in part to many people doing translations, yours included, by the way, that latest one in the Lantern. All y'all's listening, this is the end of May 2019, and the latest Lantern has a complete edition. I'm going to plug them here. I can't help it. It's so good.
Mhm.
A complete edition devoted to Fu Qingzhu, and it's just fantastic. And it's so wonderful to be able to have access to materials in English that the Chinese have had access to for such a long time. So
Mhm.
uh, I'm looking forward to this conversation here with you, Sharon, about the old medicine.
Yes. Yes, it's very once you start getting into it, it's so intriguing you can't stop exploring.
Yeah. So when you think about old or you think about classic Chinese medicine, what are you thinking about? What comes to mind? What has your attention?
Mm. Well, I was listening to one of the recent podcasts with Phil Settles, and he talked about the, you know, that like water that its source is so pure, and then it travels down and down the river, and it gets, it spreads out, but it also gets a little more silty as it goes down. And so when I think of the classics, I
Mm,
thought that was a beautiful metaphor, that you're kind of going to the source where it's very pure, before it's been interpreted through the ages. So these old books that can be very difficult to read because they're written in a very cryptic style, and really to me it's like they need to be decoded. They're written in a kind of
mm,
code, and we can guess that the ancients had a particular worldview that made it that this was not hard to read, but maybe it was for them, but maybe it wasn't for them because it fit with their world view, that we are so different from them that it's hard for us to understand what they're writing about. So the classics really invite you to shift your whole world view. And so what I've done over time is to see, like, how should I shift my worldview? And if I shift it like that or like that, do I suddenly have a sense of, oh, that now makes a lot of sense to me? Something that just seemed really bizarre and I couldn't understand at all. And I shift my worldview, and all of a sudden, this makes perfect sense now. So, sort of looking for that
yeah,
place
something
where
really
something,
comes into view.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Can you give us an example of something that maybe you'd been chewing on for a years maybe, and then
Yeah.
you finally come across something that you read, maybe you've read it now for the 5th or 6th time, and you go, "Oh, wait a minute. I think they mean this, not that."
Yeah, I had a really strong experience, where I just a shift in my perspective, and all these things fell into place. And I'd been studying classic formulas, and what I mean by that is just the formulas that come from Zhang Zhongjing. And basically, I'd been
Yeah,
studying those,
Jingfang.
and yeah, the Jingfang, and studying, with Dr. Huang Huang and Fu Yanling, both of whom we invited here to teach, and and just had a very strong attraction to those formulas, and a sense that there's something really deep here. And and certainly getting to know the formulas and how to work with them in the clinic, but I felt like I was missing something in the actual text itself, like the Shanghanlun.
Mm.
And I just read it and read it, kind of like looking for the code, that would make it become clearer. it's a it's obtuse in an important way. Um and then a friend of mine actually went to China with Heiner Fruhoff and studied with Liu Lihong over a summer.
Mm.
And this was maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, um, maybe 12 years ago. I can't remember. But anyway, she um, came back, and I'd been studying the Shanghanlun intensively that whole summer, kind of trying to figure out the code of the way it's organized and the clauses. And she said something. She said Liu Lihong said that it's all about tracking the yang. And I
Mm.
think I'd been so involved with the text that all of a sudden I was like, "Oh," and this picture came into my head spontaneously, which was of the sun going around the earth, which in a relative sense from where we stand, the sun goes around the earth, and that this yang is moving around the earth all the time, and that it's moving in the same way in our bodies, and that the Shanghanlun is all about tracking the yang, meaning the life force, and that the conformations are all related to the movement of the sun around the earth. That the movement of the yang in our body, the life force, is going in accordance with the sun, and that the conformations of the Shanghanlun, the six conformations that are sometimes translated as the six levels or six channels, that those are actually stages in the movement of the life force around our body that's in coordination with the movement of the sun around the earth. And all of a sudden, like all the formulas fell into place, sort of like click, 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 click.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, the text just made so much sense to me. So I went back to it and just had so many aha moments of how the really the physiology of the Shanghanlun, how that works. Um, and eventually that perspective, then suddenly I'm reading the Neijing in a very different way and seeing that the Neijing is really describing the physiology, and the Shanghanlun uses that physiology to describe what happens when things aren't working well and what do you do about it. So that was a big moment where tons of things got clear just with a paradigm
Yeah.
shift.
Well, I suspect these paradigm shifts, I mean, they're lovely when they arrive. It's unpredictable when they arrive,
Mhm,
but something that I've heard from other people, I'm hearing it from you, I've heard it from others, my teachers in particular. I've had a few small moments of it myself where it's like you keep banging your head against the book or whatever source it is that you're working with. And at one point, it kind of makes a little bit of sense. And then there's a point where it's like, what the hell are they talking about? This is all nonsense. And then, well, maybe it's like this. And then you try some stuff in your clinic and you wonder if you're ever going to get it. And then, yes, sometimes it's like a catalytic conversion of some sort
mhm,
and everything shifts, right? You go, oh, it's about tracking the yang,
mhm,
right? I've heard of the Shanghanlun as well. It's about the yang in the fluids.
mhm,
And sometimes it's something that's just that simple where you go, "Oh, the key thing is this," and then you go back and you read all the different parts with that in your mind, and it's almost like reading a whole different book. And then
mhm.
you start looking at other things and you go, "Oh, I see how it's reflected over there."
Mhm.
So one of those for me has been the, Liu Jing, right? The 6 there's just not a good translation for Liu Jing, the 6 Jing, is there? I mean, all the translations kinda suck. 6 levels, 6 conformations, 6 layers. I always think of a cake when I think of 6 layers. I don't think there is a good translation for that. It's just one of those things that in some ways, I just wanna leave it as 6 Jing.
Yeah, Liu
um,
Jing.
because otherwise my mind wants to fit them into a box that they don't fit in.
Yeah.
But those have been one for me recently that I used to think, "Oh, it's kind of this nice idea. We're looking at nature, we're looking at climate. It's very poetic. I love that our language and our medicine is poetic." But recently, especially when you go and you stick the 5 phases on top of those 6 jing, all kinds of stuff starts to pop into view.
Mm,
And you've spent some time really looking at the, Yun, Liu, how do you say it? The 5 phases and 6 movements.
mm.
5 movements and 6, 6
The
fa
6 chi, like
6
the Liu
6
Qi.
jing, 6 chi, right, that's right. I always forget that little phrase.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'd love to get your take on that and how that's informing your work these days.
Yeah. Well, um, going back to the Neijing, it becomes very clear first that, it's explicit that to understand the
Can
world.
we hang on a second until your phone stops ringing? You were just about to jump into your,
Yeah.
understanding of that. We'll just pick it up here for the
Yeah.
editor.
So when you go to the Neijing is actually it's a book that's about understanding physiology through numbers. And, so the number five, the number six, they have very clear meanings. Um, and the Neijing says that the qi resonating with heaven, which is the Liu qi, moves ceaselessly, and the qi corresponding to earth is still and holds its position, and that the qi corresponding to earth is the wu yun. So this idea that the number five, the wu yun, the five phases or the five movements, that they relate to earth and stay in position. So we have this idea of the number five, which is related to the zangfu as being still, that it's on the earth and it holds its
Mm.
position. So the elements themselves, they are about, this is also explicit in the Neijing, they're about birth, growth, development, decline, and death, or storage. And but so there's a being on earth that goes through these phases of birth, development, and decline and storage, or death, and this stays in position. And that's the number five, and that's really related to the Zongfu. And the number six is really related to the six chi, which is heat and fire, dryness, damp, um, cold, and wind. And so the six chi are actually, that which acts on this being, that's in order for it to grow and develop. In a way, it's like there's a plant that will grow and develop and decline. And that the six chi are like, well, it needs, it needs mud, and it needs water, and it needs air, and it needs warmth. And so these six chi that come from heaven are what it needs in order to do that thing of growing and developing and eventually dying and being reborn again. So we have this difference between the number five and the number six, and those six chi are clearly related to the six conformations, which I'll just translate as confirmations for now. Um, so the the
It's
the
helpful to have
rel-
a common language, just whichever one we agree on is fine.
yeah, yeah. Um, so the relevance of this difference between the number five and the number six is that, we have this Zongfu diagnosis, and we talk about the organs themselves and what the functions of the organs are and what the pathology of the organs are. And that kind of Zongfu diagnosis is sort of loosely classified as TCM, that modern Chinese
Mm,
medicine
mhm.
uses Zongfu diagnosis, and yet clearly in the Neijing, the Zongfu were talked about all the time. So it's not a modern idea to use the Zongfu in diagnosis, and also even in the Shanghanlun, the Zongfu are talked about. Um, so we don't want to poo-poo it and say, I do, classic formulas and I use Six Conformations, so I'm going to poo-poo Zongfu diagnosis. So for me, what interests me and what I've been teaching is being able to have a really clear Zongfu diagnosis with people, really just seeing what's going on with their organs. And but also realizing that that diagnosis is not going to get you to a good formula. And the reason it's not going to get you to a good formula is
Ah,
because that diagnosis is static, because the number 5 stays still. So you can see spleen qi deficiency, kidney yang deficiency, but it doesn't tell you anything about the dynamic and the interrelationship between the zongfu and the blood and fluids. So to me, it's
yes.
important to see clearly in a static way what's going on with the organs. And then to be able to shift that into the number 6 paradigm in order to really see the what I call the space-time motions, the actual dynamic of what's going on. So if you can see the dynamic, then you can shift it at its core. You can go into that dynamic and
Absolutely.
promote the physiological movement that's necessary to kind of unlock the whole package. So Zongfu diagnosis, we might, clear heat in the lungs or clear heat in the blood or tonify the blood. But when we go to the number 6, we see what's the reason why that heat is there and how do I change the dynamic so that that heat is resolved rather than just going in and putting out heat.
Well, isn't this I mean, this is something that we learn in our first month of acupuncture school, I would think, is that there's a root and there's a branch.
Mhm.
So, is what you're talking about here the essence of we've got a root, we got a branch? In some ways, you go look at the branch and go, "This is my snapshot, it's my diagnosis." But the root is more of like a motion picture that this snapshot is just one glimpse of.
I wouldn't say it that way. To
You
me,
wouldn't say it that
the
way. Okay.
no, to me, the root uh, is the dynamic for sure, but I wouldn't say the branch is um, the still picture. I would say that the branch is the manifestation in the body, like all the symptoms. So you have some dynamic going on in the body that is actually invisible to the patient, and invisible to us unless we can see it in the right way. So I also like to call it the invisible realm because that's what we actually use the signs
Mhm.
and symptoms and pulses to get to the invisible realm that we can understand so we can resolve it. And then that the branch is actually the headache that someone's having or the constipation, um, that we don't wanna just go and treat the constipation, the branch, and the headache. We wanna go to the root dynamic so that the branches naturally resolve. So that would be more how I would think about the root and the branch. And I think even the Wu Yun, the Zongfu, the seeing it through the number 5 is part of the root, but it's just not complete until you can move it into the number 6 and see the space-time motion dynamic of it, and that's what the 6 conformations do completely.
Okay, so let me make sure that I'm following this. We've got something that's locked in time and space, and that's basically the realm of the number 5.
Mhm.
And we can see the root of where that problem is coming from. We can see the branch manifestations. There's a lot that you can do working there, but if you really want to shift it in a super profound way, you actually need it's like jumping to a higher order of coherence, or it's like being able to go from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. You move to the number 6, where we've got the 6 different chi, and now we can begin to see how something's actually come into being, probably where it's headed to, unless we intervene.
That's right. You can see where it's
Does that
headed.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah, very much. Um, and what I've come to discover is that if you try to go from signs and symptoms to a confirmation or to a
Mhm.
formula, it's often you can't get there. Jumping from signs and symptoms to a confirmation, it gets really confusing and contradictory. And for me, what I've
This is why
discovered.
people have so much trouble with herbal medicine, right?
Exactly, exactly, and so a study for me has been how do you get from signs and symptoms, which is what the person walks in with, right? They walk in with symptoms and pulses and abdomens and complexions, they walk in with all this information, and it's all in the visible realm, but how do you get from there to the invisible realm? Where you can articulate it clearly in the invisible realm because that's what actually will lead you to the formulas is being able to articulate that in the invisible realm and see it in these space-time motions. But to me, to get there, you have to actually see what's going on first. In the number 5, you have to see the static picture, that the signs and symptoms will really lead you to a zongfu diagnosis and information about the blood and fluids. And from there, you can get to the space time motions. But if you try to just jump over the number 5, it leads to a lot of
Mhm.
misdiagnosis and confusion. And I see that a lot, the confusion between number 5 and number 6, the Zongfu kind of mushed, either dismissed completely or mushed around to try to fit with the 6. Um, and to me, they're different um, views of the body that they need each other. Those two views need each other. That there's a numerological step by step, and I can give you an example if you want of
Yeah, I
what I
would love
mean.
to have an example. I just wanna say this eh, this sounds like the way our eyes work in a way, right? If you cover up one eye, or if you've lost the sight in one eye, you lose your depth of perception,
Hmm.
right? So you can cover one eye, you lose your depth of perception. You can cover the other eye, open up the first eye. Again, you're seeing through one eye, you're seeing a flat picture. But
Hmm.
when you've got both eyes, now it's stereoscopic.
That's a
What
great.
I hear you talking about here is you get very grounded in the 5. That's one view, super important. You get, the other eye, the other foot into the world of the 6 chi, the 6 conformations, and now you've got a whole different picture. I mean, it reminds me a little bit. We used to have this thing in the Sunday newspaper. Oh man, this was like back when I was studying Chinese medicine 100 years ago. Um, it was called The Magic Eye, and it just looked like static on a television, if you're old enough to remember what
Oh
static on a
yes,
television looks like.
I
But
remember
it
those.
remember those? And you look at it and you wouldn't see anything, but if you let your eyes relax a certain way, a 3D image would come out, and once you were in the 3D image, you could walk around and look around, and there was a lot of stuff in there, but
Yeah,
you had to be in it before you could see it.
and the more you try
And what I
to
hear you
get,
talking
the
about
farther
sounds like
away it
something similar.
gets. The more you try, the farther away it gets, but there's something you have to relax and allow in order for
Yes,
it
that's
to
right.
come, and I tell my students that a clear diagnosis is not actually something you have to figure out. It's something that is revealed to you when you see things as they are and
Ah.
stop jumping to conclusions, and it's amazing, like, it's actually easier to diagnose much easier to diagnose than you might think, but it's actually much harder to do because you have to drop your regular ways of being in relation to the patient and start to see in this different way. And what's really difficult is dropping all the other things and creating the space that allows the diagnosis to be revealed. So it's really being a good diagnostician is really having to work with your own mind, because your mind is really wanting to pin it down and jump to conclusions and figure it out. And it's difficult to kind of relax that and allow it to come forward. So I demonstrate in my classes, I demonstrate a lot the process, like watch what happens when we don't jump to conclusions and how the diagnosis actually comes forward for us.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. This is, that's just a whole different kind of medicine. That's just a whole different stance toward life. Most of us have gotten a lot of gold stars for pinning things down. Oh,
Yes.
look, you're smart. You got that figured out. Oh, you got all those questions right on the test. Um, and of course, the process of learning Chinese medicine is a lot of pats on the back and check marks and yeah, you got it, so that you can get through school and that you can get your license. It almost sounds like what you're talking about here is there's a whole different kind of training that we need, or a whole different kind of practice, maybe like a capital P type practice that allows us into this other perspective.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, and it's quite beautiful, when you start to see through um, that view. Um, Not to mention effective, which is always
Hmm.
the bottom line, isn't it? Um,
Well, it is. And of course, taking care of our patients and being helpful to them is, the reason we get up in the morning, generally speaking, um, and go do the work that we do. What I hear you talking about here is a kind of a way of learning to look and see. And because we're focused today on the 5 phases and the 6 conformations, I want to hear more about how you make that shift, how you go from the 5 to the 6, because
yeah,
it I just got a hunch here. It sounds like there's something in learning to make that shift that opens up the possibility of the kind of vision and how shall I say it, the opportunity for a diagnosis to reveal itself.
right. Well, the first thing is this idea that it's all about tracking the yang is really important, and this what I call Shanghanlun physiology, the which is
Mm.
space-time motions, and what that means is, the way we learn about the Shanghanlun in TCM school is these levels that start from the outside and go deeper, 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 and then the Yin is like the deepest. And that just absolutely can't be, because everything in Chinese medicine is about cycles. You know, the cycle of the sun, the
Right.
cycle of the moon, the planets, the constellations. The I Ching is just all about cycles and how they work in our body, and how the heaven, what's going on in heaven is what's going on in our bodies, just over and over. So if we take that as a starting point, and then we see that the six conformations are really describing these space time motions. And what that means is that, if we think about Taiyang as being in the east and above the horizon, and it's going up and out. So the sun comes up in the morning in the east, it goes up and out. And so Taiyang is that motion going up and out, and it needs to go all the way up and out. And when it goes all the way, that's noon. And what happens at noon? It starts to go down and in. So Taiyang is really you look at the formulas and what kinds of herbs and formulas. Well, we can ask what happens if that gets blocked. It means that things don't go up and out the way they're supposed to. And that's basically the Taiyang pattern. And Zhang Zhongjing describes these symptoms that will come up. And those symptoms he describes are really kind of a picture of an energetic. They aren't actually only the symptoms that will show up, but they're describing this energetic of not being able to complete the up and out. And so the formulas, what are they? They're pungent and warm primarily, and they help complete the up and out. So a Taiyang pattern is actually not completing the up and out. And the formulas all
Hmm.
help the body complete that. Then you think of noon, and what happens at noon? It starts going down and in, and that's Yang Ming. So at Yang Ming, what happens if it gets blocked at noon going down? Well, it gets really hot. The sun stops at noon and can't go down, it starts to get really hot, right? And then what are these formulas like? They're bitter and cold. And this is a generalization because the formulas are
Hmm.
more complex than that. But in general, they're bitter cold. And so they clear heat and they down bear, and they down bear through primarily the digestive tract, going all the way from the top down to the bottom. Um, and, then we have the Shaoyang, which is down at dusk, and it's going then from the horizon back under. And so if we just think about yin yang, we can see yang is always coming down from heaven, and it depends on this downward movement of yang ming in order to enter our body. But in order to become physiological fire in our body, it has to pivot down in the dantian and start going up. So, like, the Yang Ming is like the pipeline, but then it has to pivot in order to become ministerial fire, in order to start supporting our body, and that's the Shaoyang. It pivots from the outside so that it can go into position. And the Neijing is very clear that the imperial fire, governs through clear light, and the ministerial fire governs by position. It's always talking about the ministerial fire has to be in the right position. So the Shaoyang really gets.
Dr. Yu was talking a lot about that,
He was
wasn't he?
talking a lot about that, exactly, and that's from the Neijing, that understanding of that being in position. And the Shaoyang is really about getting it into position, and then the Yin conformations are about keeping it there and storing it there. So you can start to see these space-time motions, and all of it is about the movement of yang. And how is that? And yang is our life force, because when we're dead, we're cold. So, being alive means being warm, and being alive means that warmth is circulating all the time, and it's circulating in these six directions all the time in order for us to be alive. And the signs and symptoms that show up are not signs and symptoms of pathogens in a location. They're signs and symptoms of that movement, that space time movement not happening. No, so a Shaoyang pattern means that the pivot is not pivoting properly. The Shaoyang pivot is not pivoting properly. So heat develops because, of course, if it's not moving, the heat is going to, that wants to come in is going to accumulate. And also the inside is going to, the next confirmation, tie in, is going to be weakened because the ministerial fire is not getting into the right position. So with the Shaoyang formula, rather than thinking about it as finding and getting a pathogen that's trapped in the Shaoyang, we think about it as restoring the pivotal function of the Shaoyang. And the symptoms that show up are not signs of a pathogen, they're simply signs of the Shaoyang not functioning. So, in this way
So
of
there's
looking at things,
signs of the process not being able to
exactly.
complete itself.
Exactly, not being able to complete itself. So we don't ever look for pathogens and try to get rid of them. We're just looking to restore the s- the space-time motion. So all the yang conformations, the Taiyang, Yangming, and Shaoyang have to be open through because they're yang, which is means hollow. They have to be open through, and the yin conformations, they're zong, that's about storage. They all need to store in order to be healthy. So the pathology of the yin conformations is always about failure to store fluids, yang, or nutrition. Or like with the Shui Yin, it's about storing within the blood, storing warmth and fluid within the blood. And so the pathology of the yin conformations is always about failure to store, where yang conformations are failure to move through. So all the treatment then, from the way that I look at it, the way I teach, we're never looking for a pathogen. Like, where's the pathogen and how do we get it out? The pathogens are actually our own physiological substances, warmth and fluids, that are not being transformed properly. So I'll give you an example of a case, and this is somebody who saw a different practitioner and did pretty well with her, and um, and just the difference of the way of looking at it. So this is someone with a very serious aggressive form of leukemia, and we know for sure that his blood is really deficient and stagnant. You can see it in his skin and complexion and tongue, and um, and so then we want to look like, okay, blood stagnation is always a branch. Like, why is his blood so stagnant? That would be my question. Like, you know, stagnant blood is one thing, but why is it so stagnant? And so, for him, there's also uh, his tongue is red and he feels hot. So
Mhm.
previously, he was given shui fuju yutong to vitalize the blood and also to do it in a cooling kind of way, which makes a lot of sense. And then shui niao jiao was added to cool heat in the blood. So and that
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense.
It all
And
makes sense, sure.
yeah, yeah. And so then when he was brought to me and like, can you do your diagnosis on him? So definitely blood stagnation due to heat, where heat is cooking up the blood and making it thick. But my question is then, where is the heat coming from? Like, it's one thing to
Mhm.
me, it's in the number 5 still, like, that static, like, heat in the blood, we wanna cool the blood and vitalize the blood. But then the question is, where is that heat coming from? And always, it's either coming from the life force getting blocked up, meaning a yang conformation, or the life force not being stored properly. So the ministerial fire not being stored and doing damage because it's improperly stored. And so for him, the the way I put it together was that um, he generally feels he said he gets cold at first. He said, "Yeah, I'm cold. I'm sensitive to the cold," but that's really new. But at night, I always have a fan going in the room no matter what. And, and so and that I get really agitated if the room is too hot, and I sweat. Anytime I feel too warm, I sweat a lot. And then I felt, especially his guan pulse on the right was really big and full. So for me, that's excess heat, which always means something's blocked and not moving through. And where is it blocked? In the Yang Ming. It's blocked in the Yang
Hmm.
Ming. There's no Shaoyang. So,
Hmm.
and so he's got big heat, big sweat, big pulse. And so then the Yang Ming is like this tube going down, and there are different kind of stations along the Yang Ming that can get blocked. It can be in your epigastric area or your large intestine area or even like your bladder, all the whole tube it can get blocked. But for him it was actually like a baihutong kind of pattern, that it was formless heat. It that in other words, there was no block in his
His
digestion.
digestion
So
was basically good. Yeah.
right, his digestion's great, his appetite, poops, everything. So, and it also goes along with baihutong that you have this easy sweat, agitation when you get too warm, and a feeling of heat. So for me, where is the heat coming from is that this aspect of Yang Ming is not open through. And for me, Bai Hutong opens it. It opens it vertically, and that it's actually affecting his blood because it's so built up in the Yang Ming. So the formula is Bai Hutong with herbs to help to uh, like liquefy and cool his blood, like Sheng Di Huang and Xuan Shen, to go into his blood and help liquefy it. But if you don't go to the source of the heat problem, then you can cool heat and you can have some effect, but you haven't gone to the root of the problem. So that's
You
how
haven't
we're
put the
looking at
fire
it
out yet.
in no, and it's really the fire that's there is only his own life force that got blocked in his chest area and is now affecting his blood. It's not a hot pathogen, right? It's just his own life force that got blocked. So that's how, we can look at it and see it in a static way. He's got excess heat, he's got, heat in the blood, um, cooking his blood and making it static. But then we bring it into number 6 with the question of where is this heat coming from? Is it deficient heat or excess heat? And that information will come from the signs and symptoms. And so we see it then, the yang is not coming down properly the way that it should. And we have to open up that movement so that the heat will disperse naturally. It's like opening windows to cool a room rather than bringing buckets of ice into it.
And just,
Um, and Shurgao,
yeah.
I have a beautiful quote about Shurgao where um, a doctor is saying, if you try to crack Shurgao into pieces, you'll see um, that only vertical pieces, no horizontal pieces. And that's really important for how Shurgao works, that it makes the Yangming go vertical. When it doesn't go vertical, it gets stuck and starts invading other things, cooking things and drying them. And for this guy, it was cooking his blood over a long period of time. So that's just an example of how you can move from a static picture, and a static picture will get you so far. But then when you move it into space time
Hmm.
motions, a different picture shows up that can take you so much further than the static picture. Yet it's also
Yeah. I
very
love
important to
this
see
case
that
study.
he's got heat in the blood, no doubt about it, and he's got excess heat. And the first formula was kind of addressing it, but didn't really have the question, where's this heat coming from? And in my mind, it's why the Shanghanlun is called the Shanghanlun, because the Han, the cold, is everything that's opposite the physiological warmth that goes against the life force is cold. So even a Yang pattern, the block itself is is yin, right? Because it's static and not moving. So we could say, even in Yang Ming, it's still damage from cold that stopped the movement of Yang Ming. And then the heat developed, you know. So, we have this limited view of what it means to have damage from cold, like just
Oh, yes.
cold coming in. You're in cold weather or something, but I think it's much deeper than that. It's anything that comes in and messes with the free movement of our life force, which is yang.
Anything that gets in the way of the yang. I had a patient the other day. I did some gua sha on, and it was like right around small intestine 10-ish, between 10 and 11. Really brought up this dark purple sha. And the thing that was so surprising to me about it, I mean, I'm scraping away. I'm guan like crazy. You would think it would feel warm, right? It felt like an ice cube. And the more that I
Mm,
would gua, the colder it got, which from a standard Western physiologic point of view makes no sense whatsoever. From a Chinese medicine point of view, oh, there's a way that the yang qi has not been able to move through this area. And that's why that the problems are there. And it may not necessarily be cold coming in and causing damage, but if for some reason the yang gets blocked up, you will end up with cold. It could be
mm.
internally generated, right? It can come from outside. Like you say, if the physiologic processes don't get to go to their completion, we can see cold arriving because the yang can't get there.
Yeah,
One of
and
the
to me,
beauties of
even
this cover, yeah, go ahead.
uh, the idea of cold, like if you think about, if somebody comes in and says something mean to you, um
Mm,
they walk in and they say, you're no good at this. Who do you think you are? And what do you feel? You feel like maybe your heart sinks, your tummy clenches, you know, someone else might flush and sweat a little bit. Like, that upsets the free movement of our life force. And we could say that's damage from cold, you know.
hmm
So, like, cold can come in lots of ways. What is it that promotes the free movement of our conformations, and what is it that gets in the way of it? And certainly emotional assaults mess us up, um, and
Absolutely.
so I think the whole idea of cold can expand into, you know beyond cold from the environment to anything that puts a wedge in the function of these space-time motions in my body would be considered cold. And then the manifestation of the block may be even heat, and fluids get screwed up and everything stops functioning well. Um, and so the manifestations can be in all these which ways, but um, the initial upset of the space-time motions, we could say, always is damage from cold.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital chi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Baerdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
This is such a helpful point. We live in this Western biomedical world. We think about germs as causing problems, and it's easy to take germ theory and then you take the idea of xie qi, evil qi, and go, oh yeah, that's a pathogen. And we tend to think of bugs, literal, other life forms coming in and causing us problems. It's a very Western point of view, and these things do happen, and they can cause their problems. But taking this larger view that you're sharing with us here today, of recognizing that it might just be our normal physiology that somehow has gone a little bit amok, a breath that can be not completely exhaled, right? Or an inhale
Mhm.
that cannot be taken all the way down into the dantian, or a digestion, it's whatever. Even as you were saying, a comment that makes you clench and then you don't unclench. And so the
Mhm.
chi doesn't move through. And so now you end up with a blockage. There are so many ways that our physiology itself can just go amok a little bit.
Right.
And
And you
it's
can
not
think about,
necessarily a bug from the outside.
well, there are bugs from outside, but how do we look at the symptoms that are created? Like, to me, the symptoms that show up, and you can try this on in your practice and see what comes to you. But for me now, for many years, the symptoms that are showing up are not the symptoms of the bug. So somebody, they get bit by a tick, they now have Lyme disease, but the symptoms that show up are either how their body wasn't functioning well even before the tick bite, which makes it hard for them to process the tick bite. So the symptoms are the symptoms of where their body isn't working well. They're not the symptoms of the Lyme disease. So a pathogen like Lyme can also upset the function of the body. So, there's, for me, I treat lots of people who frame their illness as having Lyme disease. And so, but what I look at is, well, so it doesn't even matter whether they have Lyme or not. What I need to do is promote the function that either wasn't functioning before they got the tick bite that made them unable to process it, or the function that got upset because of the tick bite. But there's nothing in my work that's looking to get rid of, to find or get rid of the Lyme. No, that
Okay,
never happens. And
this is
I have great
this
results, and I just let people, there's all these people that think I cured their Lyme, and I'm like, I don't know. To me, I just restored the function of Taiyang, but okay.
right.
And it's different on every person. But no matter what the quote infection is, we can look at it as um, upsetting a function in the body that we need to now restore. And since I have shifted my whole paradigm to think that way, the results are so much better than if I'm searching for a pathogen, especially a lot of times the conformations are thought of that way. Like there's a pathogen in Shaoyang or there's a pathogen in Taiyang. And that I I never look at things that way at all anymore and find it distracting and not helpful to look at it that way.
So you're looking more for where is the physiology not expressing itself fully in the way that it's supposed to, and looking to
Right.
correct that.
That's right.
Earlier in our conversation, we were talking about that the 6, I'm gonna use the word levels here because it's often described that way, the 6 Jing, it's not a layer cake. It's actually a circular process. Just
That's
like
right.
the 5 phases is a circular process, really, the 6 conformations, do you think of this as more like a ring or a sphere as opposed to a layer cake? How does this look in your
Exactly.
mind?
Oh, it's not just my mind. I mean, I think it's the mind of the Yellow Emperor. I mean, they talk about the resolution times and everything is in cycles, everything. And it's very clear, that the tie-in is when the sun is just under the horizon. The ministerial fire has pivoted into position, and now we can digest food in the tie-in and transform fluids. And that, and then the Shaoyin has to do with midnight and winter and nighttime, and we have to store our yang all night long very well in order to sleep and restore. And that Jue Yin is the reawakening. It's the end of yin and the reawakening of yang, going up and out towards the east, but still below the horizon. And Taiyang is then comes after Jue Yin. And the Neijing talks about the movement of the constellations in relation to the 6 conformations. And if you face south, the order of them as they go around in a circle all the time, and the timing of them. So it's very explicit in the Neijing that this is a circular process. And how that got moved into a linear process when nothing in Chinese medicine is linear, I don't know. And I think
Yeah.
also about the Wenbing, because it's sort of like, well, there's damage from cold and then there's warm illness. Like if we need a medicine for cold, but then we need a medicine for warm as well. But the Wenbing theory was much, much later, in the 1500s that started to develop. And the whole idea of these pathogens coming from the outside and really the separation of the person from nature, where there's me here and outside there, and those things outside can get in me and mess with me, that idea had strongly developed. And the idea that the Shanghan Lun was about cold pathogens coming in, so now we need another book about warm pathogens. But actually the whole idea of the Wenbing, all those formulas can be understood within the context of the Shanghanlun physiology. The Shanghanlun physiology doesn't rule out at all um, hot symptoms. That's major in the Shanghanlun. And so actually something that might be a wind heat on the Wei level in Wenbing would be an incomplete Taiyang starting to develop Yang heat. Would be a Taiyang Yang pattern. You don't need the idea of wind heat in order to treat those kinds of illnesses. You don't need the Wenbing theory at all. Some of the formulas are fantastic and to be kept, and all kinds of formulas, but they can all be understood within the context of this Shanghanlun, the 6 conformation physiology. And that's to me, like Phil was saying, going back to the source where it's really clean. And by the time it got to the Wenbing, there's a really big difference in how people started to think about their relationship with the environment from the classical times. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I've also heard it said that the Wenbing the people that were thinking about things at that time, they were deeply schooled in the Shanghanlun, right? I mean, I suspect they also were able to perceive physiology in a similar way that you talk about perceiving physiology.
Maybe, I'm not
Uh,
sure.
well, we're also all products of our times, and so for those of us in the modern age, to be able to step back from some of our biomedical and especially germ theory thinking and to begin to go back to some very basics for us in our Chinese medicine of looking at how physiology works and to think less about, I'm trying to fix or get rid of a problem, which is the business of medicine in the modern world. We're going to get rid of your problem for you. To stand in this other place of, there is something inside of you, there's a physiological life force that has its movements and storages that if that was set right, you take care of yourself. I mean, that's
Right.
that's so much the basis of Chinese medicine. When the zheng qi is strong, there's no room for illness. Well, a question I often get asked is, well, how come the zheng qi got so messed up? If my body's so damn smart, why am I in your office? Well, after this conversation with you today, it makes me realize, there's a kink in your physiology.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
really,
and if you think about
we
even
so
the
often
idea of
think about getting rid of something, but really we're just looking to re-regulate something.
yeah, and Zheng Qinan says that, um, he says there's flowing with and against, like shun
Mm,
and ni. You flow
mm,
with time or you flow against time. And that this is the same as the correct, the Zhengqi, it's not really a substance. It's things being it means like level and plumb, like everything being lined up with the movements of heaven, being correct, being in right relationship with heaven and the space-time motions is the zhengqi. It's not a substance. And the opposite of the zhengqi is xie, the evil. So if you're not correct, that's the definition of an evil, which we usually translate as a pathogen. So Zhang Qinan is saying the whole idea of pathogen got really messed up. That pathological, that character, it means like not aligned right. Zheng means being aligned right in between heaven and earth, and evil means not being aligned right. And the medicine then realigns us. And so that got kind of translated over time as pathogen, so it's this pathogen that got in and that I have to now get rid of. And so that's what I've, sort of from the beginning of once kind of seeing, oh, it's all about tracking the yang and seeing these space-time motions of the conformations, and then really realizing, oh, like this whole idea of pathogen, we we don't have to, we can see it in a different way, that it's just not being right with time in space, not being lined up properly. And that the signs and symptoms tell us the way we're not lined up right. They will show us, if we know how to read them, where we're not lined up right. And then John Zhongjing told us, what do you do about it? If you see this, you do that. And, so we have all these amazing tools to get people right with the space time motions.
yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Uh, yes. Well, and a long, long topic. Uh, I've just got one more question. I suspect there's listeners out there as well with this question at the moment, and that is, if especially if this stuff makes sense to you, if the conversation we've had today in the back of your mind or in the center of your chest or wherever, center of your gut, wherever you happen to go, ooh, there's something. If you got that feeling and you go, yeah, I want to get more into this kind of thing, I'd like to learn to be able to see the physiology better. What are some steps that listeners could take to begin to gain this kind of a perspective and this kind of a relationship with time, space, motion?
Yeah. Well, over time, there are just so many more and more resources. One really beautiful resource that just came out is Liu Hong's new book called Classical Chinese Medicine. That's
Hmm.
Liulihong, Liu Hong, Classical Chinese Medicine. It's a translation of a book that I'm so happy is translated because it's
Yeah,
very difficult for me to
Shikaozhongyi.
read. The Sukao Zhongyi,
Yeah,
yeah, and and I think he has a very similar perspective to me um, in terms of the space time motions and the meaning of the conformations. Um, so that's a great book, and of course, there are different translations of the Shanghan Lun and Jingguiyale, and I think studying the Neijing um, is is a wonderful way to go. And then I teach a 2-year program. We're in the middle of one right now, and there'll be another one in 2021. I think starting in the spring of 2021, and we I stick with the students really closely over 2 years, and we go through a process of really learning how to see this way. It's called the Graduate Mentorship Program because I really mentor people and to make sure people are getting it, and we practice a lot through case reviews and discussion forums, and um, so that's been great. I love working with students over time, and um, and they always teach me a lot because if something's not clear, then it helps me to clarify and be able to articulate it and kind of guides my research as well.
yeah,
So that's a
it's
resource for
endless, isn't it?
people. Um, but there are lots of, studying with Huang, the Tenki Formula family book is wonderful. Huang doesn't really think about the Shanghanlun physiology so much. And, but his work on the Tenki Formula families was so influential to me. I also studied a lot with Dr. Feng Shilun, who, has a really interesting way of looking at the conformations, but he sees them as locations in the body rather than space-time motion. So still he has the idea of like the pathogen that's located in Shaoyang, and also he moves from symptoms over to conformation, and it's hard to track like how did he actually get there, because for me it was hard to track how he got from the symptoms. And I realized it's he's doing a leap that isn't being clear to the reader or listener, that's he's doing something else that's not he's not quite articulating, because it's you can't always move from symptoms. Like the symptoms can be put together in a different way that could mean a different conformation. But still, I learned so much from Functional, and I think he's really worth studying with. Just his way of working with the classic formulas. So there's so many resources out there that are
Yeah.
wonderful.
Well, it's helpful to hear those that you've relied on, that you found to be helpful. My experience has been
Michael, I
there
am
is
not
no
hearing
one
you.
resource that gives it all,
I'm
but
not hearing you.
getting these different
Can you hear me?
glimpses. I can hear you. I can hear you.
I don't know why I can't hear you anymore.
Uh-oh.
Let
Well,
me check my sound settings. Um, Input. Oh, hold on. Can you talk now?
okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, somehow my sound settings got changed without me
Oh,
changing them,
you can hear me
but I
now
can
though.
hear you now.
Okay, so let me
Yes.
just finish what I was going to say and then we'll move to the next thing and wind up. Um, so yes, it seems like there's no one resource that will help you to get this kind of a vision and be able to stand in the place where you're standing, or any of us are able to stand and see the larger, broader pictures. It often takes a number of different perspectives. And so whatever it is that moves us a little bit further along, gives us this ability to see that in many ways the basics of our medicine contain a richness of material. And just because we don't get it in the beginning doesn't mean that richness is not there. It just means we might need to learn to stand in a different place to be able to understand what the people that
Exactly.
were writing that stuff were actually looking at and using themselves.
Yeah.
Sharon, any other thoughts you'd like to leave us with before we wind this up for today?
Mm. I think there's something really beautiful about when medicine shifts to thinking about oneself as this person in between heaven and earth and wanting to sort of be right with time, so that I wake up when the sun wakes up and I go to sleep when the sun goes down, and things change throughout the movement of the seasons, and just starting to perceive your own body that way, and looking at the bodies of your patients as being in relationship to heaven and earth, and our job as kind of promoting that relationship. It becomes for me it becomes a really beautiful medicine, like connected with everything, not just kind of fixing things inside people's bodies, but actually um you know aligning things so that their relationship with all these beneficial forces is
Mm.
strengthened. My daughter is a permaculture farmer, and she talks about, there's this sun and there's the rain and there's the earth. There are all these forces that just are there to help you. And you just have to line up with them and let them all do the work, and it's really similar to that. So it doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess.
You sound like Sabina Wilms there, right? Our good friend who does these wonderful translations. I'm not a practitioner, but I am a farmer, so I understand this stuff. That's what she's always telling me.
Yes,
That's
it's
great.
true.
Well,
It's like
Sharon,
she has a strong relationship with nature, and it really informs her work. You can just tell. Yeah.
yeah, and ours as well. Well, again, thank you so much for sitting down for a conversation today. I hope all the listeners have found this to be as interesting as I have, and I'm looking forward to getting into clinic this afternoon and poking around with those 6 conformations with a slightly different perspective.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Geological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Geological.